Good morning to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD Hurricane Outlook and discussion. No, it's not hurricane season yet, but it's getting close. The Eastern Pacific hurricane season begins in about 10 days, and we do have something brewing in the Atlantic, at least trying to. So we figured that we would start talking about the upcoming season, some of the things that we look for, climatology, sea surface temperatures, and then a look at the analysis on what's going on with this potential development off the southeast coast. And I will be providing these updates once per week during hurricane season for Hurricane Pro and HD users. And then if something starts to catch our attention and become a threat, these updates will be every day, including updates from the field as well, as the Hurricane Track team heads out to set up wind equipment, measuring devices, you name it, and intercept these storms and hurricanes at landfall with a purpose. We actually collect scientific data, meteorological data. We have a bunch of equipment that we set out to stream live video and really try to capture the science behind what's going on and provide you with as much information as we can from right where it's happening. So not only can you track with Hurricane Pro and HD, but we'll actually take you out there with us at the HurricaneTrack.com crew when and if, I should say, the time comes. So let's just start off at the beginning here, the climatological background. For the last 100 years or so, this is what we typically look for in graphical format. The peak of the season occurring in September. Right now in the early part of May, very little activity. It's not zero, but there's very little activity over the past 100 years or so. Roughly 23 different developments over the past more than 100 years, going back to probably 1851, really. Long time ago, right? Lots of records, ships keeping logs, etc. And that tells us that really the May time period, yes, that's when things start to tick upwards just a little bit. And that's the most active of the off-season months. December through the first part of each year, very inactive. But really it's after June 1st here that things really get cranking up, and then through the peak of September, around the 10th there, that's when hurricane season is most prevalent. And so what does that look like on a map? There's different ways to visualize this. Well, the National Hurricane Center and the Climate Prediction Center produces these various charts and maps that shows us history, which helps us to understand what to look for and when to look for it. In fact, they don't even have one from May 1st through the 9th, and it begins here on the 10th through the 20th, that 10-day time period. And in the Eastern Pacific, which, as I mentioned, that region is getting ready to begin its hurricane season on May 15th, which is interesting because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points of origin during this time period in the Eastern Pacific here. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the Atlantic. So why don't we start the Atlantic hurricane season at the same time? I don't know. One day I'll ask somebody who may know. Maybe Dr. Chris Landsey can tell us. He's the Science and Operations Officer, I do believe. That's his title at the National Hurricane Center. Maybe he can shed some light on that. As we move through May, the Eastern Pacific really starts to get ramped up over the last 100 years or so. Now remember, it looks like a lot of activity, but this is spread out over more than 100 years of hurricane climatology, really. But then we start to see a pattern here in the Northwest Caribbean Sea and in and around Cuba and Hispaniola, a small clustering of development. But again, this is over quite a long period of time. So May is sort of your gray area beginning of the hurricane season. I guess it makes it easy to just say it's June through November, but really as we get into May, especially the last 10 days, there's more and more chance for development, but that's still small, but it is there. And then finally, once we get into June, the Atlantic hurricane season officially begins, and you can see that the favorite areas are close to home, and not just the United States interests, but all these different Central American nations, the Bahamas, Cuba, and then out in the Atlantic, the tropical Atlantic, nothing at all over the time period that we're looking at here, the first 10 days of June. and the Southeast Pacific stays very, very busy. So that's generally what we look for. So during this time, you can roughly draw a box like that and say this is the area that we start to watch from now, the first part of May here. As you can see, not much in the first part, a little bit more as we go through the second 10 days, and finally, as we get into the first 10 days of June, the hurricane season is on. So there's a look at climatology. That's generally what we expect over the long haul. What about this year? Well, there are different things that drive a hurricane season's inactivity or activity, the pluses or minuses of the overall numbers. If you're looking at numbers, the how many named storms, how many hurricanes where they'll be. Now remember, none of this will tell us what the impact is going to be. There may be one 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm that dumps 30 inches of rain over your city, and that's a real big problem, I guarantee it. Or it could be a Category 5 hurricane. And I know this is the standard, it only takes one speech, but it really, really is true. And nobody can tell you what the impact may or may not be in a seasonal forecast. So just keep that in mind as we look at this information. So, what's driving this hurricane season? Well, generally, sea surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific running above normal. We call that El Nino, and it's a weak El Nino right now, the abnormal warming of the tropical Pacific. Why does that matter? Well, the easiest way to explain it, when you have all of this warm water relative to normal, you get a lot of upward motion in the atmosphere. The air rises more efficiently, and when it rises over the East Pacific, it tends to sink and dry over the Caribbean and the tropical Atlantic. Not so much up here in the subtropics. And also you have very strong winds coming out of Africa over the tropical Atlantic at about 5,000 feet in the atmosphere, and that tends to bring dry, dusty air. It also cools off the sea surface temperatures in the eastern Atlantic, making that area very hostile for development. Some of that's related to the fact that there is this El Nino, this warming of the Pacific, but some of it is not. We've had an abnormally strong high-pressure area sitting out over the eastern Atlantic, driving those trade winds across very briskly. So we almost have kind of like a La Nina, if you will, in the Atlantic, a cooling of the water, and an El Nino in the Pacific. But what does it all mean? Well, when we see this type of a pattern, we typically expect that there won't be 15 or 20 named storms. In fact, it may be that we see below the long-term average of 10 named storms, maybe 6, 7, 8 named storms this year. But it's hard to say because we're still only in early May, and some of this can change over time. Different models are showing different things, but the general consensus is that the El Nino will stick around, and that the Atlantic basin, especially the deep tropics here, will be very unfavorable for development. So anything that happens could affect Bermuda maybe, the Canadian Maritimes, or if it's going to take place, it would be in the western Atlantic, closer to land areas. So don't look for a lot of development coming out of Africa and making its way all the way across. Now watch, I'll say that, and we'll have one lone hurricane that will do that this year. But really, this is the usually what we see is the Atlantic basin, deep tropics shut down almost completely during a season like we're looking at now. However, this is not an exact science, and things can change. We're talking about very large-scale weather patterns and the ocean and how it couples with the atmosphere. So there's a lot to keep in mind and watch for over the coming months. And that's what we'll be able to do, by the way, on these weekly discussions. We won't just be looking at, is there something developing? We'll take a look at the bigger picture. As well, will there be something developing? And if so, why? And if not, why not? All right, so actual sea surface temperatures. These are the actual temperatures. The other map was departures from normal. So this is what the sea surface temperature pattern looks like right now. And anything south of this red line that I'm drawing is ready for hurricane activity. 26 degrees Celsius, or we can just call it 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So all of this area through here, the Caribbean, most of the southern Gulf of Mexico, and the extreme southwest part of the Atlantic basin here, or the Atlantic proper, the North Atlantic Ocean, ready for hurricane development in terms of sea surface temperatures. You have to have about 80 degrees or higher, and that helps to evaporate a lot of moisture into the atmosphere, and it gives tropical storms and hurricanes the fuel that they need to develop. And I want to point something out as we get into the discussion of what may be happening in the next few days. As you can see right through here in the Gulf Stream, in the western part of the Atlantic, the water temperature is 26 degrees Celsius, or right around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And in fact, if I zoom in on this, if it'll let me, you can see much clearer right off the Carolina coast here. There it is. I mean, it's a little narrow area, but this is important in terms of what's coming up. Not only is that warm enough, but it's in the Gulf Stream, so that water is constantly moving and being refreshed with more warm water. And so that leads me to what's going on right now. Here we are, May 5th, and we already have the yellow low area of development. Now, I want to point something out. Up until this season, if it was 30%, which is what it's at right now, in fact, if I mouse over it, you can see that right there, 30% chance of cyclone formation over the next 5 days. It used to be that when you got to 30% that this would be the orange color right here. But they changed it. So low is less than 40%, medium is 40 to 60, high is greater than 60%. Through last year, if it was at 30, which is it is now, it would be considered medium. So they've changed things a little bit. So we're in the low category. What is it? What's trying to develop? Well, let's take a look at that through a satellite animation. And you can see off the southeast coast, really way down off of Florida today, there's a leftover frontal boundary that's finally washed itself out. Now we have a surface trough sitting in here, which is just a focusing mechanism for the air to kind of come together and converge. And the upper level winds are pretty brisk, but they're trying to form this upper level high pressure area that allows the developing storm to not be torn apart. But it's not perfect. Water temperatures are only marginal. The atmosphere is still fairly dry. You have an upper level low pressure system sitting over here. So it's not the best of situations for something to develop. Although you can get tropical storms and hurricanes to develop off of old fronts that come off the coast and then lay down here over this very warm water, but usually not in May. So what we think is going to happen through the different global models is a weak area of low pressure, semi-tropical in nature, kind of a hybrid mix, really no big impact in terms of to any great degree. Looks like it'll form over the next few days right here in the Bahamas and then slowly make its way north off the southeast coast. This is the Global Forecast System, or GFS. And if we move through time here, this is valid basically tomorrow morning at around 2 a.m. Eastern Time. And you see what happens as we go through the day. Wednesday, the model generally starts to develop this weak area of low pressure off the east coast of Florida, moving it slowly off to the north. And I mean, look at this. This is 1,012 millibar low. If you track hurricanes, you know that's really insignificant. Very disorganized precipitation shield indicated by the model. This isn't round. It's not, got spiral arms. I mean, later on in the season, if we get something in the Atlantic, and we will certainly have some activity in the Pacific, you'll see what a bona fide tropical storm or hurricane looks like in the model. And a lot of you already know about that already. And this isn't that. It's kind of got that comma shape to it, so it's lopsided. And that tells us that this is not a very organized system. But it does have the potential, as we move through time here, to bring some wind and rain towards the Carolina coast. Some of these wind barbs in here, 30 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour. But very light precip overall, onshore flow, kind of breezy, a little showery at times as we move through. This is into the Friday time frame, and here it is, maybe ruining some golf plans for the Myrtle Beach area and southeast North Carolina beach plans this weekend, but not, it looks like now. And I showed you, climatology dictates it as well. a big deal. And as you can see, it kind of weakens over time throughout the weekend. So I don't see much of anything to worry about coming from this. So that's the kind of thing that we can take a look at during these Hurricane Outlook and discussion video blogs that I'll be producing for our audience on Hurricane HD and Hurricane Pro. And hopefully you'll learn something from it. They won't all be this lengthy, by the way. I'll try to keep them to just a few minutes when we get into the season. But today, I wanted to have a good introduction, sort of a starting point, and get you acclimated to what's what. So I am Mark Sudduth. HurricaneTrack.com is our website. We've been working with Hurricane Pro in HD for several years now. We have our own app as well, which is much more impact focused. There is some tracking in it, but Hurricane Pro in HD is by far the best tracking you're going to find. So our app is called Hurricane Impact, 2 words, and that's what it's all about. You track it with a great app like Hurricane Pro or HD, and when it comes ashore, get Hurricane Impact, and we'll show you what's going on with our live weather data. Remember, I mentioned that earlier, that we set up equipment. All of that goes into our app, Hurricane Impact, but we will be sharing some in-the-field video blogs with users of Hurricane Pro and HD as well. That partnership is very important because we want to get information out to as many people as possible, keep them engaged, and keep them armed with information that they can rely on. That it's from people that know what they're doing. And my team and I have almost 20 years of experience, so hopefully you can trust what we say. All right, well, that is it from me for today. I will have another video blog. If this system develops and it's worthy of it, you'll see it show up in the Hurricane Pro and HD interface. If something is posted, you'll know about it. Otherwise, on May the 15th, I'll start these videos once a week at the minimum, and as I said, if something starts to brew, more often than that as needed. All right, have a good rest of the week. Thanks for tuning in again. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com and, of course, Hurricane Pro and HD. I'll talk to you again soon.